Hey, how y'all doing? Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is your boy Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about something that's actually very interesting. So, Brandon Walker of Barstool Sports made a comment that one of his, let's say, his contemporaries at Barstool Sports got upset about. So, Brandon Walker said in a clubhouse, wrestlers sacrifice more than any other pro athlete. So, she basically this young lady, Katie Dischio or whatever, basically just said, sure. And then, of course, people have come in and said, well, he's right. Other people are saying she's wrong. But this is her thing. But they know the outcome beforehand. They're not competing to their fullest abilities. Yes, I'll give you the busy schedule, but to me, it's not a true competition. All right. So that's her. That's her thing. So I see a lot of people. Basically, that's their thing. Is that pro wrestling is either A, not a sport, or B, they know the outcome beforehand, which of course has nothing to do with the sacrifices that needs to be made. Right now, I think do wrestlers make? If let's say you don't consider wrestling to be a sport because of the predetermined nature of the outcome, then it's certainly they sacrifice far more than most other performers. When you talk about musicians or magicians or playwrights or the only people who are up there is people who do physical things like in the circus. So if you have, let's say, acrobats, that they would probably sacrifice more or as much as a pro wrestler. They don't take nearly as many bumps, but they put a lot of strain on their body. But let's say you're one of the people who think that they are pro athletes, and you have to say, well, they don't sacrifice as much as most pro athletes do because they're not using their bodies to their fullest potential, which is what she said. And I said to myself, okay, let's look at one of these metrics. Now, of course, it's not the be all end all, but let's look at a metric. I took what most people, if you asked them, the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan. Basketball is a physical, intensive sport, but it's not football, right? If I was to say how many games did the greatest football player of all time play, it's probably not that many. But basketball is a pretty long career. And Michael Jordan had a pretty long career. He only played 1,072 basketball games in his entire NBA career. This is the highest. Now, this, of course, is not in his life because you have to count, if he played high school basketball, college basketball, etc. But this is the peak performance level, his peak years, physically, maturity, money, making money, etc. He only played 1,072 basketball games over the course of who knows how many years that he played. So let's talk about this. If you were to tell the widely recognized greatest wrestler of all time, there's only like two or three. Let's say Ric Flair. How many matches do you think Ric Flair had over the course of his entire career? He had more than 1,000, more than 1,100. If you was to round up how many games Michael Jordan played to 1,100, right? Ric Flair would have that beat before leaving the 70s because these dudes were wrestling 300 days a year. Also, when you actually look at time played, how long is a basketball game? A basketball game is only 48 minutes, but the game itself lasts 2 to 3 hours due to timeouts and commercial breaks. Wrestlers do not get timeouts and they don't get commercial breaks. So you talk about people who play longer, they have longer careers, no timeouts or commercial breaks during the match. Well, they have commercial breaks, but they are not allowed to take a break, because there are people watching. A lot of the NBA is you sitting here watching commercials and then they dribble for a little bit. And I'm not degrading it. I'm just saying it is what it is. And then these guys don't play the entire 48 minutes. They play a certain amount of minutes per game, right? Because they bench guys for a little while and then guys come back. In wrestling, there's the tag situation where you might have something like that, where you tag out. But if you was to compare Ric Flair to Michael Jordan, Ric Flair spent far more time doing what he did than what Michael Jordan did. And I mean, but the only way out of this is to say, well, they're not real athletes. That's the only way you really get to get out of this, is to say, well, what Ric Flair did, his career, was performance art. And Michael Jordan was a quote unquote real athlete. Even though, some people may say that basketball is a little bit of a work, because there's always some subjectivity to sports, right? There's always some subjectivity to sports. Let's see how many. Let's see. They say Tom Brady is the best football player of all time. How many games did Tom Brady play? How many games has he played? He has played 353 games. He started 353 games, including regular season and playoffs. And he's been in the NFL for a long, long time. He played 20 seasons in the NFL. And Tom Brady has only played 353 games. Any wrestler would laugh at that. Especially a WWE guy would laugh at this. And he is the greatest of all time when it comes to football. Well, at least quarterbacks, right? Now, and the quarterback position has been very protected over the last several years, too, as far as, no head-on collisions and stuff like that. And Brady played before they got rid of all that stuff. But then you had the rougher days of the NFL, where this stuff was basically they was ready to pop out each other's eyeballs. So, I mean, you have to ask the question, what do you mean by sacrifice? Now, if you mean sacrifice as far as what they do physically to their bodies, absolutely. Wrestlers destroy their bodies a lot faster than football players and basketball players, even though I think football might be more comparable due to the amount of falling and the amount of contact, but, so maybe that's comparable. But boxing, MMA, there's long periods of inactivity in boxing. There's long periods of inactivity when it comes to MMA. But let's say you think that those guys are the best. So I said, how many fights did Muhammad Ali have? Right? How many fights did Muhammad Ali have? Muhammad Ali had 61 fights in his entire career. And Muhammad Ali fought past his prime. And he still only had 61 fights as a pro. So that means when you look at the more contact involved in a game, the fewer, obviously the fewer amount of games you have, right? Basketball is low contact. You can have a long career, 1,000 games. Football, semi-full contact, that you could have 353 games and be considered the best. Boxing is pretty much full contact because they're throwing, even though they're wearing gloves, but they're still pretty much throwing haymakers at each other's heads for a long period of time. 61 fights is a lot, and he fought past his prime. And again, this is Muhammad Ali, who started boxing as a teenager and was world champion at 21. Right? So this guy kept fighting, even though he had become world champion pretty early in his career. And these are the three greatest and the three hardest sports. Baseball, I'm pretty sure is a hard sport. I'm pretty sure hockey is hard. But these are the biggest sports in the United States. Let's put it like that. Boxing is still sort of, I guess, bigger than MMA. Probably not on TV. I think if you put UFC on TV at the same time as boxing, more people will probably watch UFC. But when you look at boxing as far as being a traditional combat sport, it is insane how popular boxing, especially is around the world. Like I'm looking at it from the United States, but there's boxing's popularity in like Latin America and Mexico is unparalleled. So the only way to get out of this argument is to say wrestling isn't a sport because they have more matches, they have less downtime, they have no off season, and so you have to say like the only way out of this argument, and I think it's the pretty much the only way out of the argument is to say that say what she said. Well, it's predetermined, therefore it's not a real sport. Ergo, they're not athletes. Now, the argument about them not being athletes is untrue. You can argue whether pro wrestling is a sport or not. You can't argue whether they're athletes or not, because everything they do is athletic. But you can't say, well, the only argument you can say is it's predetermined, therefore. But I didn't know that being determined, whether the idea of it being predetermined means it's a sport or not. And also, you can't determine how much effort somebody put in by whether the game is predetermined or not, right? So you see people like, you think Michael Jordan played at 100% in every game he ever played? No, I don't believe that. I believe that he probably took some games off. Tom Brady too. Muhammad Ali, I'm pretty sure he took some fights off. He didn't go and he didn't train as hard as he could all the time. And I'm pretty sure the same thing about wrestlers. When you have these house show matches, they probably don't do everything that they can do, you know? But Ric Flair was having 1 hour Broadways, not even on TV. I'm just talking about for the local audience. You know, that's more time. He spent more time in the ring than Michael Jordan did playing basketball. More time than Tom Brady did playing football. More time than Muhammad Ali was in a boxing fight. None of them people played an hour game straight, right? None of them did it. But Ric Flair did. So the only way out of this situation is to say they're not athletes or this is not a sport. But let's ask the question, what is a sport, right? Who gets to decide what a sport is? So I looked around, and I saw that the International Olympic Committee considers chess to be a sport because it requires physical and mental exertion and competition. Now, since that seems to be the running definition of sports, is that it involves exertion physically and or mentally. So in some cases, you'll see people say darts is a sport or bowling is a sport. And these are non-contact sports, but they're competitions, right? So then, of course, people will say, then pro wrestling isn't a sport because it's not a competition. But then some wrestlers will say it is a competition. It's just a competition in a different way. For instance, you're not competing to win the match. You're competing for crowds, the crowd reaction. You're competing for bigger paydays. You're competing for in a different way. You're competing in performance, right? Better performers get paid better, get bigger spots, get better spots, make more money, compete on a higher level, more money, better spots, more titles and stuff like that. So, but that depends. Is pro wrestling going to be in the Olympics? Probably not. So using the idea of, well, whether the Olympics consider it a sport or not, might not be the best metric. So you can argue whether it's a sport or not. That's fine. But I don't know if you can argue this. You can't argue the sacrifice. You can only argue the definitions of athlete and sport, which is it's a weaselly way of getting around it, but it's an interesting way of getting around it. You have to ask the question, are they athletes? I think that they're absolutely athletes. Is it a sport? I say it's not a traditional sport. Esports aren't traditional sports. It's like e-betting, isn't a typical gambling. But it has the same effect. Like people get addicted to gambling online in the same way they get addicted to gambling in the actual casino. They have the same effect. And I say pro wrestling has pretty much the same effect on the body as any other sport. Hell, maybe even more so, because typically wrestlers do it more and do it longer. Because it's a performance, you can continue to go in your 50s, and in heavens to Betsy, in your 60s, you can continue to go sporadically. Obviously, your output is going to go down. You're not going to wrestle 300 matches a year at 50. I mean, who are you, Bockwinkel? But so that's really the only way around this whole thing, is to play definition games. To say, well, it's not a sport. Well, they're not athletes. Well, it's not a competition in a traditional sense. And I think the only people who really kind of know wrestling know this kind of thing, and you have to know a lot about wrestling. You have to know a lot about sports, and I think that pro wrestling is over time becoming more accepted as a sport because ESPN started following it and Fox Sports started following it. And maybe those are due to partnerships with WWE. And that helps, I'm sure. But it's actually becoming more accepted in the sports realm. You have athletes that are talking about it more. Athletes who have done it, that have actually wrestled and participated, respect it a lot more. I think a lot of people respect it a lot more once they do it and once they get involved in it. And that's very interesting. It's a very interesting debate, and I don't want to just say, well, she's wrong and she doesn't know shit about wrestling and she's burying wrestling. She is a typical sports reporter. She knows her beat. She knows, oh, okay, well, this stuff isn't real, aka it's not real. Therefore, I can easily dismiss this as not sport. She's not looking at it from a deeper perspective, you know. But that's what I'm here for, and that's what most wrestling fans are here for, is to tell these people who are like, oh, they're throwing fake punches, like, not all the time. You know, some you should probably look at some of these black eyes that these guys get, and are they going to walk out looking like a UFC fighter? No, but neither does football players, and nobody says how football is not a sport and not contact. It's like there's different levels of contact in sports. You know, like in some sports, you're not supposed to be making contact with people, and you still do. Like basketball, there's actually supposed to be no contact in basketball. You know, but if you play a physical style, like, you know, the Detroit Bad Boys in the 90s, you know, where you might poke somebody in the eye, you might bat them, might even throw a clothesline or an elbow or something like that. They used to call that dirty. You playing dirty. You know, you're taking cheap shots. Instead of saying, well, other people are supposed to play dirty too, they say, well, no, you're playing dirty. You know, no elbows. You know, you can't say that in football or hockey where they checking people against the glass and stuff like that. There's different levels of contact in sports. And some sports have no contact at all, like chess. So, but if you look at his definition from his perspective, he's right. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. You like what I do, send me money, or which will be through the Cash App in the description below. Well, not in the description, but in the comment section. Or you could use the hashtag 3Count Commentaries to support the channel. Either way is fine with me. I thank you guys regardless, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah.